Let's see, do we have any whiskey drinkers watching? In Texas, we have a whiskey brand that uses scrap leather and materials from bootmakers and such to customize their whiskey tops. You get everything from snakeskin, leather, ostrich, to fun little holiday ones. And people have started keeping their caps and starting a collection. And some friends of mine asked if I could make them a Texas-shaped display for them. I don't normally take on commissions, but this project did sound like fun, so I agreed. So far, they have around 90 caps, and I wanted the display to not only hold what they currently have, but also give them some room to grow and fill it in. I started by first modeling the whiskey top so that I could figure out how big I needed to make the Texas to get them all to fit. I measured the cork that would be stuck into the Texas shape, then also the larger top. And this allowed me to populate the state with a layout that looked nice and not cluttered. And it also gave me something to export and take to the printers and get an image printed off for me. Now, just my personal system, when I'm making a template from a print off, I always use packing tape to first cover the entire image. This not only gives it some rigidity, but will also protect the stencil from getting damaged. It's kind of hard on larger stencils like this to keep it flat while applying the tape, but you don't want to create and tape in any creases or folds while you're laying down the tape. So try and keep the paper nice and tight and straight as you're laying it down. Then I just take an X-Acto knife to the shape to cut it out. With the shape and now size determined, I picked out some wood to make this project from. I went back and forth between maple and walnut, but ended up on the walnut. Then I jointed the boards to get a nice flat edge and then also one face. To get the second face flat, I moved my thickness planer outside to my shop porch and ran each board through. Now that they were flat, I flipped out the wings on my miter saw and cut the boards to their needed length. Aw, look at those good old shop dogs. Next, I arranged my board so that the shape of Texas would fit. Of course, using that stencil as a guide on how I needed to line up the boards to each other. I used a Sharpie to make some marks on the alignment and then move things out of the way to get some clamps laid down. With the project being an indoor one, I used Type-On Original on all the joints, applying a good amount to the inside edges of all of the boards. After getting the glue applied, I made sure to pay attention to my Sharpie marks and adjust the position of the boards as needed. I left that to dry in a few Bessie parallel clamps and quick clamps on the smaller portions, then went to work on a T and X I wanted to add to the state of Texas, which entailed me making a stencil out of them, then using them as a reference on how big of a glue up I needed to make. See, the state would end up holding 105 tops total, but with them already having 90, I didn't want them to run out of room so quickly. So instead of making the state bigger, I wanted to make some add-ons for them, and the logo of the brand of whiskey was perfect since it's a T and X. I got the blanks for the text portion and clamps drying while I moved back to the now dried state shape. This blank is too large to run through my planer, so I clamped it down using a few quick clamps, then started sanding. I removed the bulk of material first with my 3-inch belt sander, then did some final rough sanding with my larger ROS with 100 grit sandpaper. Once things looked good and flat, I brought my stencil back in, laid it on top of the blank, and traced around it using a Sharpie. Cool. Alright, now to cut. This is easy enough. I took mine over to the bandsaw, but if you don't have one, then of course a jigsaw would make quick work of it. In fact, because the wide and crazy shape of Texas, there were some nooks and crannies that I couldn't get with the bandsaw and had to get with my jigsaw anyways. Nice. Man, now that I'm seeing this, I wouldn't mind just hanging a walnut-shaped Texas on my wall now. Okay, but back to sanding. I started refining the face with my smaller palm RS using 120 grit, then working down to 220. For the spots where my palm sander couldn't reach, I quickly got with my spindle sander. For all you square states such as Colorado and Wyoming, you won't have to worry about this step. Alrighty, at this point, things were all sanded with the state shape, so I once again brought out my stencil. This time I was going to use it to mark where the hole pattern needed to be. And to do this, I first taped the stencil to my shape using painter's tape. Then I used a mallet and transfer punch to find center on each circle, then make a small indent in the wood underneath it. And I don't know if you can pick it up, but on my print off, I made sure to mark the centers of my circles just for making this task easy. Cool. I don't know if you can see that, but this method worked like a champ. Now when I place a Forstner bit in my drill, I could get the center point of that bit right in that indent and take off drilling. Since I don't want to get into my workbench, I placed a few boards under it just to lift it off enough so that whenever I punch all the way through, I wouldn't get into my plywood. However, I actually tried to stop right before I punched through completely so I could bore almost the entire way through, but then flip it over and finish the hole from the other side. And this minimized tear out to almost nothing. Although I am using these Rockler Forstner bits, and they cut really clean anyways. At this point, I know I still have a little ways to go before it's done, but I couldn't help but poke in the tops to get an idea on how it will look. I feel like there needs to be some sort of fun sound effect as these are popped in. Pop, 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 pop. That looks cool. Let's go ahead and get a finish on this one, and then we'll go back to those TX add-ons. For this project, I'm going with General Finishes Armor Seal in satin. And I've had great luck applying this finish with a regular clean rag, so that's what I stuck with for this. I did pay close attention to try not and get finish down inside those holes. I didn't want the finish buildup to make the tops difficult to slide in and out. So instead of 2 or 3 kind of heavy coats, I did 4 really light coatings. And man, I just absolutely love walnut under finish. I needed to wait a few hours between coatings for that armor seal, so I let that set up while I went back to work on the text parts. Since the whiskey logo is dark, then light, and then dark, I thought it would be cool to do the dark in walnut and the light in maple. And I'll tell you now that I ran out of time to do 3 layers, so instead I just did 2. I started by cutting the center of the logo and then traced that on my walnut blanks and cut them out. I couldn't joint these edges, so instead I took a lot of time to sand them down and used the help of my Armor Tool workbench for this task. You can see all the dog holes in the top, which means I can place fences and clamps in just about any orientation to help me hold down small parts as I'm working on them. In this case, I attached a fence or a stop attachment and then 2 self-adjusting clamps to hang onto the workpiece. Then, just like the state, I sanded these down to 220 grit. And next I started measuring, cutting, and gluing on the maple border pieces. And oh my goodness, did I underestimate how long this process would take. This step took up so much time, and looking back on it, yes, it does look good, but I don't know if I would do it again. What I ended up doing was measuring, then cutting each part as I went, and then gluing it in place. However, I could only glue a few pieces in place at a time because the clamps would get in each other's way. I did switch back and forth between the 2 parts to try and minimize the downtime, but there was still a lot of waiting on glue to dry. If I did it again, I suppose I could also give in and use a pen nailer so I wouldn't have to wait on glue to dry. But at that time, I was aiming for no nail holes since it will be up on the wall and seen. Now, to drill the holes in these, I had to get a little creative. I used a spare print, because I always get a spare print, and a woodpecker straight edge to cut out a row of holes. I could take this strip of holes and lay it out on my T and my X to figure out their placement. And I like this method because it will keep the spacing the same as the states. I taped it in place where it looked good, used the transfer punch to mark the stencil, then laid the stencil on the actual part and transfer punched again to get my final indent markings on where I needed to drill. And that worked wonderfully. I drilled out the holes and then applied the same 4 light coats of Armor Seal to it. And now, after my friends fill up their Texas, they can add the whiskey logo to their wall. For mounting it, I attached a French cleat to the back side of the parts. This is an angled cleat so that all they have to do is hang an opposing cleat level on their wall and then mate up the 2. So, what do you think? I am personally so pleased with the way that this turned out. If you would like to make your own or have another idea where you need a template for your state shape, then be sure to check out my website. Not only do I have the templates for all 50 states available over on my website, but also bottle cap displays in the shape of the states as well. So be sure to check the link down below if you're interested. I hope that you enjoyed it, and of course I would love to hear your feedback down in the comments below. I will see you on whatever it is I'm building next, guys.